Before we get into this episode, I want to do something that I often encourage other founders to do, which is ask for help. If this podcast or any of the other content that we produce has been helpful to you in any small way, please take a second out of your time to leave a review and subscribe. Those small things will take you so little time and make a huge difference for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
The goal is to change American health insurance, period. 5 years from now, I want to see a totally different system in place. And that dream is expensive.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. There are a lot of common traits when it comes to successful founders. Some might say it's that we're mold breakers. Others would say it's that we're all sort of dissatisfied with the status quo, always shooting for something bigger, always shooting for something crazier. Certainly something that I relate to. But I would go a layer deeper and say that for most successful entrepreneurs, they're really trying to make even a small dent in the universe, and honestly, trying to make the world a better place in the process. Today's guest deeply embodies that last thought. She spent years of her career working for Doctors Without Borders and the United Nations, living overseas, and funding entrepreneurs who are making a difference in their local communities. It was these experiences that caused Stacy Edgar to start Ventuer, a company that's focused on revolutionizing healthcare. To date, Ventuer has raised nearly $8 million in venture funding. $120,000 of that came from a pre-seed round led by Techstars, and the rest in a seed round that closed in August of 2023. More than $7.6 million led by GSR Ventures. Quite the jump. When I saw this, I immediately wanted to learn more about Ventuer's story. Of course, there are ups and downs, but after looking into Stacy's background, it's clear as to where she got the resilience to weather the storm.
Basically, my whole life, when I think about money, I think of a few things. One, the fact that I've always been surrounded by entrepreneurs. My parents are both engineers. They're the type who will build a robot in the garage or prototype this, prototype that. They had a consulting business. But also both of them came from quite a bit of hardship. My mother is an immigrant from Taiwan, and she was actually the first person born in Taiwan of the family. My family came from China in 1949, lost everything when they moved to Taiwan. And then when my mother was the first one to move to America, my dad's from Appalachia. So two worlds that really they're not traditionally thought of together. But what they had in common was this attitude of resourcefulness, of I'm going to make my own way, even though the world is against me. And part of that is entrepreneurship. Of if the door's not going to be open for me, I'm going to kick it down and do my own thing and start my own way. So yeah, that's been part of my whole life. And my co-founder, who's actually my brother, he started two other startups before we joined together to found Venture. And actually, our childhood and that relationship with money is part of why we started the company. The first year of my parents' business, actually, I was 3 years old. My dad got really sick, and health insurance all of a sudden became front and center in our life in terms of it was our biggest expense as a family. And we have a happy story in that he's still here despite all odds. And the experience also forced us to be proactive about our health insurance and think about it as part of a financial management strategy. And that's very much part of what Venture does today in our technology. There's more to it, but the goal is basically to solve health insurance affordability in this crisis we have as in our country, where it's the leading cause of bankruptcy and debt. We have never experienced that as a family, luckily, but we have always been on the brink where the world could fall out from under you because somebody got sick. And that's what we want no one to feel. So that's yeah.
That's a great background. I'd also like to just point out that it's funny that your mom is Taiwanese, your dad is from Appalachia. I'm full Taiwanese, but I grew up in Virginia. So like kind
So
of
you get
a
it.
little bit of both. Yeah, I know the dichotomy there. They're very, very, very different. And so it does sound like though both of your parents instilled that sort of entrepreneurial drive. So this makes sense that you would eventually make your way there. And you said that your brother had been an entrepreneur before you, but
Mhm.
on your way to getting to this opportunity to start the company, tell me a little bit about that path. We don't have to go super deep into that because I'd like to quickly transition to the whole idea of raising capital for the company. But
Sure.
tell me about how you decided to finally take the leap and maybe join your brother and your parents in this wild world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Well, the thing I wanted to do when I graduated college was see the world and hopefully make it a better place. I know that sounds cheesy. I really wanted world peace. And that took me to places like Doctors Without Borders. I worked for the United Nations for a bit. I spent over a decade in Washington, D.C. and overseas in places like Afghanistan and Myanmar, and actually was helping communities on healthcare, also helping businesses to grow in those environments, and would meet entrepreneurs, and finally met enough entrepreneurs overseas who we funded through these programs that I was working on that I was jealous. I was like, I want to do it. I want to be you. So, the whole arc of my career, which is all about helping people live healthier and wealthier, that's still there, just a different modality. And
Mm.
Tim, my brother, he's more classic in a kind of startup. When you think of startup background, he spent a decade at Microsoft and then interspersed within that decade at Microsoft as an engineer. He founded 2 startups. And so he brings the engineering side. He's like walking AI. It's very upsetting. He's so good. And then on my side, I bring the experience on highly regulated markets. And that's where we came together. And it was actually what caused the aha moment. I left my job. I was a business development director and oversaw an 18-country portfolio covering all the way from Afghanistan to the Philippines, so South and Southeast Asia, and branched out on my own in 2019 and started a consulting business. And then that business actually did really, really well, started hiring employees, and the experience of buying health insurance for the first time as a business owner, I got so mad that I started a whole new company. It went into a new industry, and we're like, this is what we have to solve. And we realized this is also part of our family legacy too. That's us.
That's great. So the background makes a ton of sense. And a lot of times when I talk to founders about the story, we kind of talk a little bit about this idea of when did you know that you'd have to raise money for this company? If I had to guess, like when you started thinking about tackling the world of health insurance, you knew it was going to be one of those bigger businesses, bigger ideas that isn't something you necessarily like bootstrap from the beginning. But maybe I'm wrong. When we were doing our research on Venture, we saw that you did go through Techstars, a great program there, specialized around healthcare, I think. And so maybe you can tell me, we don't have to go into the huge details about your first raise, but this idea like you'd have to raise capital for this company, was that something that was part of the inception of the company? Or did you hit a point of friction that required you to say, you know what, we're not going to be able to do this without capital?
Yeah. Actually before we even started, we knew. And the reason why is the goal is to change American health insurance, period. 5 years from now, I want to see a totally different system in place. And that dream is expensive. And we did start out with first friends and family. We got into Techstars that brought in a few more institutional investors. We actually did bootstrap as well. So we put in probably 600,000 of our own money, and primarily Tim's, that Microsoft stock, man. So also partially mine as well. And that's what led us to certain milestones that led us to our most recent raise.
Perfect. So. This is a great segue. This is actually what I wanted to focus our conversation around. The thing that I'll point out first is a lot of people will go through the starting of a company. Some will have experience the way your brother does as your co-founder. And, this understanding that he probably knew enough to maybe go out there and raise capital or maybe do it without an accelerator program, but there is so much value in having an organization that's respected like Techstars, sort of shepherding you along the way of those first few months of the program and your company, or at least post joining Techstars. And it can be very helpful in raising that first institutional round. But as you go into the future and start making more progress, you then ran into this next aha moment or realization that, okay, the next time we need capital is coming on quite soon. We're going to have to go out and fundraise. And so that's where I want to put us to in terms of like remembering what was going on, because it can be very hard to figure out when a company actually raised capital based on when they announce. There's always this lag time.
Sure.
But I have to imagine that you weren't raising in the easiest market to raise capital in. You can correct me on timelines, but I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what was happening at Venture, maybe post Techstars in that raise, what
Sure.
you guys were building towards, and then what was the thing that made you know, ooh, I think we have to go fundraise now? Was it hitting milestones? Was it runway running out? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think it's important to know kind of our trajectory from the product side a little bit. We
Okay.
came into Techstars with AI decision support tools to help an individual pick the best health insurance for themselves and to analyze it from a financial management perspective. We learned about a new model of health insurance called individual coverage health reimbursement arrangements, ICHRAs, which basically means an employer can provide cash and it's considered pre-tax instead of needing to do a group plan. And United Healthcare was the one who was part of the Techstars program we were in, who said, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about applying the technology you have to this market? And around that time, it was 2 years ago. So about November, December 2021, that also coincided with the main open enrollment season that people face. And so we made this huge product pivot. And then we had a year to build and to test before we would see that cycle again. So we actually had this whole year where when we went out to market right after Techstars, a lot of folks were like, okay, well, you got exciting traction. What we actually did and during Techstars is we sold before we built. So we knew there was demand and we're like, there's demand. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. But, it's hard sometimes to tell and, to prove that to an investor. That's a hard case to make. Then 2022 comes around. Open enrollment, the big moment. Were we right or were we not? And we went from basically 100 people on our platform to 5,000 people on our platform, and like less than maybe like 5K in MRR to over 150K MRR in 45 days. And we were company transformed. And then we have kept growing ever since. And we went to market. We're like, okay, well, wow, holy smokes, that went better than we thought. And then we started getting inbound. And by the time we knew we needed to raise and we knew we had to do it quickly because open enrollment this year, which were, fall 2023, we're like, okay, that's just going to be around the corner. What's this company going to look like? And then that's what this current raise was founded around, of how ambitious can we be? How ambitious should we be? And showing that we were a company that returned nearly $2 million in recurring revenue with one. And so like, what would happen? We raised, in this most recent round, we announced 7.6, like, we're like, okay, what are we going to do with that kind of money? And that's where it's kind of fun. So it's like where you kind of get and get a bit dream bigger.
Well, first of all, congratulations we can congratulate you on the raise, but certainly before that raise had to happen, all that momentum and all that traction and all that success in the business is really what you should be congratulated for. It's really cool to hear. To double click on what actually happened, can you at least broad strokes tell us how much runway you had in the company as you were entering into open enrollment for 2022?
Okay. So this is where Tim and we decided we had a really hard time in 2022, admittedly, raising. And because it was such a long time before, basically January through September, like a lot of things could happen through then. And it was hard to convince investors that, no, we're going to do this. So we did have angels come in. We did have a few institutional investors write us a few small checks, but that's actually the reason we put in so much of our own money is we've decided this is going to exist in the world. And so at that time, I don't know that I would have admitted this then, but we were living month to month. We were like, okay, what can we sell this like 401k? What can I sell in there? What can we sell in savings? And we were actually like really embarrassed about having to do that. It was actually our investor now, who's now part of our board. He's like, that's really impressive that you all did that. And it wasn't until he told us that we were like, oh, okay. It was actually this like source of shame that we're like, we can't convince others that this is real yet, but we know it's real. And this is how much we're willing to bet our own capital on it. And like, for the record, for anybody who's listening, what we did was reckless. I don't recommend it at all, but it's like we made a decision that this is going to succeed. And this is what we're willing to stake.
So far, we've gotten a chance to hear about the excitement and the struggle involved in getting Venteur on investors' radars back in 2022, and hear about some of the hard decisions the team had to make in order to keep the company going. I love hearing stories like this because I think it gives a more accurate representation of what most founders have to go through in order to get their first major round of fundraising done. When we come back, we get to hear more about how Stacy ran her fundraise that ultimately led to a $7.6 million seed round led by GSR Ventures. Like many of you, my last venture-backed startup was a SaaS business. In that company early on, we had the opportunity to sell into a large enterprise, but ran into some walls when they asked us if we were SOC 2 certified. Not only were we not certified, we also found out that it would take our small team a ton of time to get that done, and so we ended up abandoning the deal. If you haven't run into a situation like that where a potential customer or investor is asking if you're SOC 2, HIPAA, GDPR, or ISO 27001 certified, you probably will soon. But unlike me, you could use a company called Vanta to help. Vanta helps automate up to 90% of the compliance work, getting you audit ready in weeks rather than months, and eliminating up to 85% of the costs. Not only that, but Vanta can start small with you and scale up as you grow, helping you land bigger deals and earn customer trust. The best part is, Vanta is offering funded listeners $1,000 off for going to vanta.com/funded. That's VANTA.com/funded for $1,000 off your service. Check it out. That's amazing. Yeah, I've seen a lot of different stories get told, either firsthand or secondhand, from founders who aren't sure if they should share this element of their story or what they did. And a lot of times they're embarrassed. Your version is a great example of it. You're embarrassed by it, but I agree. Like, if not that you would recommend everyone do it, but when you see it as an investor, you're like, they really believe in this. Like, all the reading of signals and trying to dig into people's backgrounds and hear what people have to say about Stacy and Tim, it can all be summed up in the fact that you were like, we're going to bet everything on this because we believe in it. I had another founder who, at some point, found out that he dropped out of college to start his first company. He was embarrassed that he didn't get a degree. And then he bootstrapped one of his companies to a huge exit, like a 9-figure exit. And he was like, well, he's European and didn't want to be braggadocious the way like maybe some American investors want you to be. And so he wouldn't ever mention that because he was embarrassed. And there were all these fantastic signals that I think founders are really embarrassed by, including yours. So thanks for sharing that. One, that's very impressive and also harrowing, but you got here. You're here.
Yeah.
The thing that I would say that I see is likely what was happening is you were telling investors, we're going to do all this stuff. And when open enrollment happens, like, so fund us. And they're like, maybe we'll just wait until open enrollment to see if it actually happens. And so it did, right?
It did.
So were you prepared to go fundraise immediately after open enrollment started being successful? Or was it like, kind of like, oh, it's happening. And you're like, wow, now we really have to go fundraise, prepare all the materials, prepare everything. Was it serial or parallel?
It was serial. And not by choice. Part of it was when you grow that fast, I mean, like we were working insane hours just to keep up with demand and keep up with customers. And we didn't have time to do literally anything else. So it took us 3 months to get through that wave. And then finally find the time like on the weekends and whatnot to like put together materials. But like, we need to raise desperately. We need more people to like fuel this. But we were also fighting, when you have a customer right there in front of you, then, to me, like I will always put the customer first. Although that said, I also recognize, CEO's main job is to keep the money in the bank. But those were like very competing priorities at that time. And it just took longer just because of how fast we were growing, to be honest, and carving out the time of the day.
So having that difficult challenge of balancing, do I work in the company? Do I work in the fundraise? It's both important things. Did that make starting to fundraise feel, were you scared of the fundraise? Like, did it?
Oh, yeah.
It didn't. So in the beginning, it didn't feel like it was going to be a slam dunk.
No, not at all. No.
Okay.
Also because we were, to be honest, like I was shell shocked from 2022 of honestly just not like pulling it off and in a better environment. And so then, we knew 2023, the funding markets had changed. That said, we had accomplished a small miracle in our growth. And we're like, no, we're capital efficient. We can do this. But I was, and I also, I don't know, you start to get the imposter syndrome sinks in. It's like, am I doing something wrong? Is it me? And a lot, it can be hard to bounce back when you've gone an extended period of time of like things not quite clicking in that part. But we're really fortunate that they did. And it went way better than we ever could have. So
the scar tissue from failed fundraises, that lasts a long time, and those rejections and no's cut deep, especially as it pushed you to the edge and having to take on so much personal risk. Do you remember how many investors you had to talk to between the sort of failed first attempt before open enrollment 2022 and then afterwards?
So let's focus on the after, because I think the numbers are similar, but the process was different. So when we went out to market in basically April. And we did have, in quarter one, we did have catch-up calls with folks who we had talked to in 2022 and we're like, this is what we're thinking about, and had those initial dialogues. And then we talked to close to 100 firms in April. And we finally ran the process. You read about it, but like pulling it off is different. Like, putting them all in a 2-week period, running having your data room ready to go on day one, having the follow-up materials ready to go on day one, having your customer references there. So we finally, we talked to about 100, and actually the raise was done by the end of April, we were oversubscribed. And so this was the one where I was like, okay, finally, everything I've read about of what you're supposed to do, we put into practice and ran mostly clean.
And some of it could have been you finally had tried to raise, so you had built some materials up before and you could kind of build on top of those. So it wasn't starting from complete scratch. And like you said, you were doing catch-up calls, which means you didn't have to build that target list of like 200 from scratch as well. You had those first names, and it's kind of like people don't realize how much work goes into it, and you were chipping away at it over the course of a full year so that when you're ready to go, you're adding on to it. So glad you were able to finally feel what that feels like, right? Because now when you go in the future to go raise, it's like you have so many other patterns to match against and the sort of playbook to run. Whereas before you read about it and it's like, yeah, is that what it's going to feel like? And is that really what I should be doing? And now it really makes sense, right? So even though you had a raise that you launched really quickly and did well with, and over the course of a month, I have to imagine not every single person you talked to said yes. You didn't get all yeses, right?
That's correct.
Do you remember it? Do you remember any of the harder points in this most recent raise? Any like particularly painful rejections or bad behavior that sort of still keeps you up at night?
Rejections, no. There were plenty. Don't get me wrong. I think probably if we've come to the point of, all right, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I know that sounds like, but you don't really want somebody who's wishy-washy on your cap table. You want a hell yes. And if you're not a hell yes, like we shouldn't be working together. So that's where like I don't feel any regret. Like I think that it means that like we're not on the same page. And if we're not on the same page, then let's give it more time or it just wasn't meant to be. So on the bad behavior, I hesitate to, there was some. It was actually post-close, where not from any of our current investors, but I would say there are, like you do get interest from VCs who are diligencing somebody else. And I don't know, behaviors around that, I'll say, can be interesting.
We'll leave it at that. I think that's probably the most prudent thing to do, but yes. I totally hear you. And I unfortunately know that story too well. Have heard it too many times. So we're glad you were able to navigate that. And I always put founders in kind of a weird headspace when I ask them, what was the worst thing that happened to you during the fundraise? But I don't like leaving you there because I always like asking. So GSR Ventures led the round, is that right? Do you remember where you were when you got the note that they wanted to lead your round, either a call or an email? Do you remember what that was like?
It was both. It was a call and an email. And it was in my apartment. And yeah. And then we actually, we did have multiple, that was the first. And we did have a few others express interest following that. I don't know. But it was this huge sigh of relief of like, okay, all right. It's kind of like that feeling of like, okay, I'm going to college. I don't, like your first college admission.
You're like, it's going to happen, right? Like, because up till then, you could be like, it really might not happen. You don't really know, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What did you and Tim do after you got that first term sheet?
Oh, we kept fundraising. So we were I think that's why I'm like, well, I don't know. Where was I? Because I think we were still very much in the middle of the process. And I think something we have come to appreciate about fundraising, it's not done till it's done, till it's like done, right? So we had made that mistake previously and I'm never again. So I think I can't remember it I remember where I was, but it's not this like huge moment.
It's over yet.
Yeah, because it was like, let's just get back to work.
Right.
Yeah.
What did you guys do anything when the money was finally wired and you were like, okay, now it's done? Or was it just like a second of this is great and then that feeling that a lot of founders get, which is like, oh shoot, now we have to do this?
I think it was the latter. It was okay, let's go. Now that I'm saying this out loud, man, I should go celebrate. I'll do a belated.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's the Taiwanese side of you, but like that is that feeling of, for me, when I had that money hit for a second, it was like amazing. And then I had this feeling of, it wasn't like guilt. It was more like responsibility that it was like, God, I have to do what my responsibility like calls me to do. And because I know what that feeling feels like, I just want to tell you that, yes, you and Tim, it's been 5, 6 months, 7 months since you did it. It's worth a dinner out and maybe just like a reflection on what you guys were able to accomplish.
Yeah. I think, and so Tim did buy, this is a very sad story. He bought a new pair of shoes. I do remember that. And that's important because Christmas last year, I remember my mother asked me, she's like, are you guys okay? And we were like, yeah, we're fine. What are you talking about? And he had asked her, he was home for Christmas and he had asked her to help him buy super glue. And then when she asked, why do you need super glue? And it's like, oh, well, it's cheaper than a new pair of shoes. And his shoes were like talking. That's, we really freaked our family out. So we're, so I think it's like some of the things where we're like, okay, I can like afford a new pair of shoes now. So like, those are kind of things that, it's kind of like a return back to normal. So
love that. Awesome. Well, the story is incredible and I'm so glad you were comfortable enough to share like what it meant to not get it done in early 2022 and then what you guys had to go through. But also just talking through and articulating that feeling of like, we tried to raise before, we did it without really running that mythical process, so that in 2023, when we did it, we were like, we want to do it that way. And just the feeling and your own approach just being so different is great for people to hear. I always tell people, it's like, I can advise people to do that, run a process or whatever. And for whatever reason, if I don't say it the right way, or they don't believe me, or they don't see themselves in me, then when I say do this one thing, it can be hard for them to follow. But it's really helpful to hear a lot of different people say it in a lot of different ways in their own experiences. So I think sharing is going to make a difference in someone's world when they think about fundraising. So when you think about open enrollment for 2023 and Thanksgiving, or do we have exciting goals in mind? What do we think is happening here?
We do. So we are, that's all we've been doing since November 1st, enrolling people in health insurance, talking to people about their health care, and also saving businesses a huge amount of money in the process, and saving families a huge amount of money. We are mid-process. The thing that we're trying to do, we're trying to push ourselves to see like, okay, how far can we go? How far can we go? Scaling's really hard. And it's just a matter of like, what's the multiple on growth that works?
So good.
We should see a similar year like we did last. Well, I don't know. Last year going from zero to one is different than, but we're looking at anywhere from 3 to 5x in top line growth. So
fantastic. Before the episode ended, I asked Stacy what it's been like working on Venture with her brother, Tim.
Well, I mean, we have this long history of working together, maybe not professionally, but...
You mean you've known him his whole life?
Literally. Yeah, literally his whole life. Yes. Actually, during our Techstars interview, we do tell the story about us growing up. And then there was a follow-up question of, how do you know each other? And I went dark. I was like, from birth? What am I supposed to say here? But
that's funny.
We've built things together. We actually did, I used to dance, and Tim followed me for a few years. There's photos of this. We have tap dance duets. So, we've got a lot of experience working together on different projects.
Love that. That was my conversation with Stacy Edgar, co-founder and CEO of Venture, a company helping businesses provide their employees with personalized health insurance at a fraction of the cost. After the break, I'll be sitting down with my producer, Paige, to pick her brain about this episode. If you're a crazy busy entrepreneur like me, I know one thing's certain: you have too much to do. Of course, you'd love to hire someone else to help, but I bet you think you can't afford it. It turns out you can, especially if you use a recruiting firm called Agent, like I have in recruiting my last 4 team members. Agent specializes in recruiting overseas talent. Now, I know what you're thinking, not another virtual assistant hiring agency. Yes, they can help you hire assistants, but they can also help you hire skilled talent like marketers, designers, and even engineers at a fraction of the cost. Now, if you're looking to add more leverage to your team, check out fundedpod.com/agent. That's AGENT to add your next team member. You can thank me later. Paige, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you, Jason?
I'm good. I was excited to chat with you about this one because Stacy in this interview was describing a pattern or a cadence within fundraising that feels a little bit different. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, I wonder what Paige is going to think. So let's jump into it.
I have some thoughts for sure. First off, I thought this is just a random thought, but I thought it was cool how she also had a Taiwanese background. Like, I know she's half Taiwanese,
I was not ready for that with the last name Edgar, but the mutual affiliation with Taiwanese people is always strong.
I also thought this was a interesting storyline, like you were mentioning, with funding in terms of funding, because so she had her Techstars in 2021. They raised like a couple $100,000, and then fast forward to 2023, and they're raising a $7.7 million seed round. Which is that's a big jump, right? That's a big jump, or is that something you see? I don't know.
No, it's a massive jump. And considering by the time she did raise the seed round, we were already into challenging market conditions for fundraising. So those two things together make it even more of a massive jump.
Hmm.
We're curious on my thoughts on how that happens, or do you have thoughts on your own?
I actually am a little bit curious on how that happens, like, because I don't know, it just seems like, in terms of valuation or like that means a huge valuation jump as well, right?
It should mean a huge valuation jump as well. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to consider is your instincts are pretty correct. It's like you don't usually see that kind of a big of a jump. It's usually staged out, right? You
Yeah.
raise a tiny little pre-seed round like she did, 100, 200, $300,000. And the idea is that you use that money to get to another milestone. And once you get to that milestone, then you raise the next round. Maybe that's between, call it $1 and $3 million. And then
Mm.
after that, a round that would look more like the round that she raised, $7 to $8 million round.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you'll remember, that wasn't necessarily her choice, right? Like, I think she would have rather raised a round in between and kind
Mm.
of more comfortably built the company. Um, but what ended up happening was that she wasn't able to. And a
Mm.
lot of
Yeah.
times when you hear a story like this, or when I see something come up, I'm quick to encourage founders that, this could be a blessing in disguise. And for her, what ended up happening is because she has so much, actually my read on it is that because her business is so tied to the cycles of signing up for health insurance, open enrollment, she wasn't able to get that fundraise in before one of her open enrollment runs every year. And then she just tightened her belt, sucked it up. They built the company as much as they could. And they were able to get to such a big milestone that the next set of investors were excited. And they were like, this shows us that you're much further along.
Yeah. Speaking of that hard time raising in 2022, like I think she raised a angel round or got some help from outside investors. But I thought it was really cool. In the episode, she was talking about how she wanted to, like, her and her brother, obviously, they co-founded this company, and they had that hard period of time where they couldn't raise, even though they were getting some like crazy traction and things just working out. So they started pouring a lot of their own capital into it. And she was talking about how she was trying to show investors that they were willing to bet on themselves,
Yeah.
which I thought was really badass. And I'm wondering if like that's one of those things that's a green signal to an investor that's like, hey, I mean, I guess maybe not always, but they're willing to dump all their capital into this. She was saying we were month to month, like right on there was not much wiggle room, I just thought that was
For
pretty
sure.
badass.
No, I mean, it is a great signal. And, it's not the only signal that a founder needs in order to attract
Hmm.
capital. But I do remember my time at Greycroft early on in my career. We would discuss every deal. And I remember one of the investors mentioning characteristics of a certain founder very successful founder in our portfolio who happened to have a nice car and happened to have a nice house. And there was open discussion internally about like what that said about the founder. And this
Huh.
one investor said, I kind of love when I see a founder who is stretched a little bit thin, is really attached to the business, invest his own money. So in this particular case, all these things were going together. He, he had spent money, his own money on like a car. And
Mm.
he also invested his own money into the company. And he was like, it just shows a certain level of confidence in himself, a certain level of commitment and attachment to the business. And he's like, I love all those things being put together. And while this wasn't the case for Stacy, she wasn't like spending money on material things. Seeing a founder like her betting their own money on the company and showing how much confidence they have in the business really says a lot, right? Because at the
Totally.
stage of investing that they were going out to attract, there weren't a ton of very specific traction points that they could point to. So
Hmm.
showing an insider's view and an insider's level of confidence, I think probably did do a lot to convince investors that this was a good bet.
Yeah. And I mean, she did have a pretty crazy traction point after open enrollment. Like she said they went from 5K to 150K in MRR. And I wasn't sure. I don't know if the timelines were a little bit messy, but I was wondering if she had like open enrollment had happened and then she still had a hard time raising. I wasn't clear on that. I was trying to figure that out. Or if it was like before open enrollment and they hadn't had that big traction burst yet. So that was something I was pondering that I wasn't sure. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm messing up the timelines, but I thought that she was saying she was still having a hard time raising while getting that crazy traction during open enrollment. And I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that was it was a pop. I think there can always be like a bar that keeps getting raised by investors. And for whatever reason,
Uh,
if they're not convinced, they might say like, oh, it would be great to see more. But then once they see that, you can always sort of rationalize or make excuses for why that number, like why it was an exception or why it was just a pop that won't continue. And,
hmm.
I think like there are a lot of different reasons why Stacy might have run into problems not matching the sort of pattern matching that a lot of investors look for. But whatever the case may be, I do think not raising when she initially wanted to probably ends up being a blessing in disguise. She gets to raise more at a much higher valuation and keep more of the company.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did mean that there was about probably over a year of fairly stressful times, tapping into
Oh
her
my
own
God.
savings
Yes.
accounts, tightening their belt in order to get the company ready for the next open enrollment period.
Oh, yeah, and she was talking about the balance of, like, trying to focus on the customer and grow the business and fundraise, like, I can't even imagine what that dynamic and that experience is like, and then she started talking about her seed round, the 7.7 million seed round, and how she was able to she was like, "You talk about, the perfect fundraising process, and then you actually do it, and it's crazy, like, it's a lot of work, but that experience of she pulled it off in a month." She
Yeah.
literally said she started in April, and by the end of April, she had wrapped up that round, which I thought was absolutely insane, especially because it was in 2023. Like last April, that was when we were starting to see it just wasn't fundraising wasn't as easy. Um,
Yeah. I mean, there was a huge collapse of the banking system for a hot
yeah.
second. No, but I loved hearing that. Right. And
Mhm.
I want, even though you and I love talking about the importance of the process and process being important, and I love that Stacy talked about how much
Yeah.
work it was to get that ready, and then the result was this very quick process. But I also want to point out that the fact that she had gone out and talked to investors a year prior and actually not gotten a full round together,
Yeah.
that can't be overlooked as part of the prep process, right? I wouldn't wish it upon any other founder in terms of like part of your prep is failing at a first round, at failing at a round and then successfully doing it later. But part of preparation is making sure that investors are aware of who you are so that they can keep an eye on you, so they can see your progress. And,
Mhm.
it's just a good way of calling out to all the founders out there as they prepare for their own future fundraisers, just making sure that there's awareness, making sure that they get on people's radars will help grease the wheels for a future fundraise.
Yeah, she was able to loop back around. Like I think you guys touched on this, that she was able to loop back around to all those investors that had passed in 2022. A similar thing happened with Joanna Strober, a
That's
previous
right.
guest, where she was able to loop back around, and that's how she actually ended up closing her round. Someone
Yeah.
who was kind of interested in her last round but didn't want to do it. They ended up leading. So crazy how that works. Like you said, like
Yeah.
sometimes you have to go through a rough round or something doesn't, you can't actually get the round together, and then time goes by and things change if you're able to showcase growth or traction on some level. But she did
Yeah.
say that for this seed round, she was oversubscribed. I have no idea
Mhm.
what that means. So if you could just help me
I'm glad
understand
you
that.
asked. And by the way, that it's just an add a cherry on top to what she was experiencing. And before we get to the oversubscribe mark, the thing that came to my mind was before you kick off any fundraise, whether or not you feel like overly confident about your ability to do this or slightly nervous or extremely scared, I think everyone goes into a fundraise with anxiety levels at a relatively high mark, right? You're about to enter something that definitively will be a success or a failure. Like you are setting yourself up for a very scary black or white binary outcome. And it's like failing doesn't feel great. And so you get into it and you hope and wish that you've done everything you can to set up a great fundraise. And I can tell what it probably felt like. You know, she essentially hit go on her fundraise and then the momentum started and she's like, it's working, it's working. And it
Yes.
finally worked. And the cherry on top is not just that she got the term sheet that she wanted, but that she was quote unquote oversubscribed. I'm glad you asked the question. It's funny that that term hasn't come up yet. But oversubscribed essentially means you have more demand for your fundraising round than you can take on or that you've decided to take on. So essentially you're saying, I want to raise $6 million and there is enough demand. There are enough investors who want to write checks where $9 million could be invested in the round. That is what we refer to as being oversubscribed.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so for her, that's
a
great
good
sign.
thing. Yeah,
Right.
that's a
She's
great
like,
thing.
people want this and I'm not willing to take their money. It's a very great outcome.
Why wouldn't you want to take their money? Now I have like a bunch of questions. Like,
Great follow-up question.
wait, let me
There,
guess my answer. Does it dilute something? No way.
yay, good job, Paige. Yeah. As you take on more money, your valuation, your post-money valuation, especially if the round is pegged at a post-money, that means the more money you put into it, the more dilution you take on, and your post-money valuation doesn't change, which is a bit of a technicality. But even if you were to peg it at a pre-money valuation, and maybe we will do a added segment on this in the back channel to talk about pre-money and post-money. But whether or not it's pegged at a post-money or pegged at a pre-money, taking on more money means more dilution. And you might think to yourself, well, more money right now won't get me to the next milestone and quicker or whatever. So why take the money now? You could always take the smaller amount that you originally intended on, build your company, and then later on raise more money at a much higher valuation, which is how you engineer a fundraising cadence that minimizes dilution.
Damn. Yeah, we should do a TBC episode on that so I can listen to it.
Yeah, no, that's good. But you did ask the right questions and your instincts were correct. One of them is about dilution. And then the other one, which is kind of a art and a soft skill, is sometimes over capitalizing a company and pushing it, even if you were able to push the valuation higher, doesn't necessarily get you to a better place. In fact, it might get you to an uncomfortable spot where their valuation is too high and it makes it hard to quote unquote grow into that valuation. And then sometimes having more money means just spending money more inefficiently. And it can drive people to thinking that they need to spend money faster. And people just end up making bad decisions. It doesn't feel like that would happen. Like as a founder, you're like, no, I would never do that. But time and time again, you see companies with more capital than they need spend money faster than they need to, and then get into a difficult situation later.
That's interesting.
Totally.
That's an interesting dynamic. I think I feel pretty good about this. It's kind of cool to see like you talking. It's not like a second language anymore. So,
well,
there's definitely still some things.
No, the other thing is that you keep thinking that it'll be the exact same story and it's essentially the same process, but every time we talk, there's a slight little variation and it creates new opportunities for you to ask questions and get a little bit more nuance with your understanding. And like I always said, no dumb questions. And if you have the question page, I know a bunch of other founders out there are faking it until they make it and not asking the questions. So they are stoked that you asked the questions. Great job, Paige.
I will do it for them. Find me on social and I will ask any question you want me to so you don't have to.
Awesome. Great
All
stuff,
right.
Paige.
Until next time. Bye.
If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our weekly newsletter at fundedpod.com/newsletter. You can find me on social. I'm at Jayyeh, that's Jayyeh, on almost every platform. I respond to newsletter replies and DMs, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey, guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey, everyone.
And as always, one last thanks to our fantastic sponsor, Ventur, a leading automated security and compliance platform.